You won't believe the gut-wrenching moment when Captain Hale yelled, "Strip down now!" forcing Emily Carter to bare her soul before hundreds at San Diego's naval base, thinking she was just a failing rookie. Her inner turmoil boiled, flashbacks of surviving hell in Iraq, losing her team in a classified op that haunts her nights, making her feel like an outsider in her own country. Americans, this hits home. The pain of being judged, undervalued, fighting invisible wars. Don't turn away. The explosive reveal of her Iron Wolf tattoo flips the script, turning shame into glory. Miss it, and you'll regret not witnessing a real-life comeback that screams resilience for every patriot out there. At Joint Base Lewis McChord, the massive military stronghold nestled among the lush green forests of Washington state, where the crisp Pacific air mingles with the echoing crack of rifle fire, Emily Carter arrived like a fleeting breeze, soft, yet shrouded in mystery. After that shocking moment everyone whispered about, when Captain Marcus Hale thought he was teaching a weak rookie a lesson, Emily now stood at the center of wary glances, as if she were a strange package mistakenly delivered from the military post office. At 28, she had an unremarkable appearance. An average height of 5 feet 6 inches, brown hair cropped neatly to regulation, and a face almost devoid of emotion, as if every smile had been worn away by the unseen storms of a life no one knew. Her comrades, men and women from across America, from the ranches of Texas to the skyscrapers of Wall Street, eyed her with a mix of suspicion and contempt, like she was a kale salad at a barbecue cookout. They whispered behind her back, Emily was an outsider, a rookie transferred from some nameless unit with a vague record, carrying nothing but a silence that grated on everyone, as if she were playing a game of who can stay quiet longer in a contest no one wanted to join. Sergeant Laura Kane, a tough-as-nails female officer with a sharp Texas drawl, led this unspoken tribunal. Built sturdy from years of training in the Mojave Desert, Kane would gather her small clique in the mess hall, where the pungent smell of military coffee blended with the roar of laughter and chatter. She'd shake her head in disdain whenever she saw Emily sitting alone at a corner table, nibbling on scrambled eggs as tough as granite from the nearby Cascade Mountains. Carter looks like she's acting the part of a soldier, not being one, Kane once muttered, her voice dripping with sarcasm, sparking chuckles from the group, a light-hearted jab to ease the tension. But really a mask for their unease. They avoided her during breaks, spreading rumors that she'd been slipped into the unit through connections in Washington, D.C., where politicians often play chess with their cronies' careers. And Captain Marcus Hale, commander of the elite training unit, saw Emily as the weak link, a phrase he loved to hammer home, his stern face like he was delivering a speech at the Lincoln Memorial. Hale, a grizzled Iraq War veteran with a commanding presence, muscles bulging from gym sessions in San Diego, preached discipline and outward strength. He piled grueling tasks on Emily like hauling a 50-pound backpack up a simulated Mount Rainier slope just to test her, hoping she'd complain or quit, as he'd done with other rookies to cement his authority. In the military world, where camaraderie is survival, like the team spirit of the Seattle Seahawks just down the road, Emily was systematically isolated. Her comrades shunned her during downtime, choosing seats far away as if she carried the last remnants of the COVID virus. They swapped silly, mocking stories. Maybe Carter's a Russian spy, or just some California yoga girl who'd rather stretch than shoot. But beneath the jokes lay real jealousy. Emily completed every task with chilling efficiency, never whining, never bragging, making them feel inferior. She jogged through the Olympic forest without gasping, assembled an M4 rifle faster than anyone, and scribbled notes in an old leather journal like a Stanford scientist. This isolation wasn't just social, it was an invisible wall, where Emily was seen as weak, untrustworthy, a crack in the perfect chain of command Hale prided himself on. She ate alone, slept on a bunk made so tight a quarter could bounce off it, and dodged unnecessary small talk, frustrating her teammates. They wanted her to fit in. but she seemed to live in a world where laughter and friendship were luxuries she couldn't afford. Yet, there were subtle moments that shifted the air ever so slightly. Like when Kane accidentally dropped her files in a gust from Puget Sound, Emily quietly picked them up and handed them back without a word, leaving Kane flustered for a second, an unexpected bit of humor, as if Emily were playing a game of who's more polite no one signed up for. Or when Hale chewed out a Florida rookie for a mistake, Emily just watched, her eyes flickering with a fleeting empathy, as if she'd been in that spot before. These small details, woven deftly amid the prejudice, made her comrades start to wonder, was Emily truly weak, or was she hiding something far greater? In the heart of Lewis McChord, where American heroes trained for wars from World War II to Afghanistan, Emily became a living enigma, a rookie pushed to the margins of military society yet standing tall, making everyone secretly think, if she doesn't belong here, why is she so damn perfect? And you know what? Secrets like that don't stay buried long. Will Emily keep her silence, or is an explosive moment coming that you'll regret missing?
Welcome to Veteran Silent Story, where forgotten battles come alive in powerful tales. Subscribe now and honor the silence that shaped our freedom.
Beneath the dense green canopy of the Olympic Mountains, where Pacific fog often cloaks the landscape like a veil of secrets, the first clues about Emily Carter's past began to emerge. Subtle as raindrops pattering on forest leaves, stirring doubts among her comrades about the perfect facade she'd built. After weeks of isolation at Joint Base Lewis McChord, where teamwork is celebrated like the camaraderie of Team USA Olympians, Emily was no longer just an odd rookie. She became a living puzzle, with tiny details glinting like sunlight through the trees, hinting at a history far more complex than her average appearance suggested. During a late-night training session, as the team staggered through rugged terrain under a chilling rain that soaked their uniforms, Emily not only completed her tasks but quietly aided a sprained ankle rookie, a young guy from the Midwest, his hands trembling with exhaustion. She wrapped his bandage with professional precision, her movements deft, as if her hands were accustomed to real battlefield wounds, not just textbook drills. Her teammates, panting nearby, exchanged stunned glances, as if they'd just seen a hunting dog morph into a lion, a fleeting moment of unexpected humor in the dark, making them wonder if Emily was hiding superhero skills beneath her standard-issue fatigues. Sergeant Laura Kane, hardened by years in the Nevada desert, was the first to notice the worn leather journal Emily always carried, tucked tightly in her pocket like a private treasure. Its pages weren't filled with typical emotional diary entries, but detailed analyses of terrain, tactical movements, and even potential weaknesses in the team's formation, sharp as a CIA intelligence report, making Kane sneak a glance and shudder, wondering if Emily was playing amateur detective or was truly a master in disguise. Hale, in his usual fit of frustration, once rifled through Emily's belongings when she wasn't around, hoping to uncover proof of his suspicions. He stumbled upon a small wooden box with a combination lock, its surface weathered like it had traveled from the Middle East, but he couldn't open it, a quietly humorous moment, as if the box was mocking his clumsy curiosity, leaving Hale red-faced and more irritated, yet stirring a deeper unease. Rumors spread through whispered chats in the mess hall, where the lingering scent of weekend barbecue still hung in the air. Was she in a special forces unit? Or just some eccentric Hollywood writer type obsessed with note-taking? These rumors, though laced with humor to ease the tension, slowly chipped away at her teammates' confidence, making them see Emily differently, not with pure contempt anymore, but with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Emily maintained her silence, a protective shell so refined it forced others to acknowledge it. She dodged all talk of family or her past, as if those memories were unhealed wounds that would bleed at the slightest touch. Sometimes, during brief breaks by the Puget Sound, where waves lapped gently like the ocean's whispers, she gazed toward the Pacific, her eyes heavy with the weight of loss, a subtle sadness, not theatrical, but potent enough to evoke images of distant battlefields, familiar to many American veterans, from Iraq's dusty plains to Afghanistan's rocky peaks. These details, flickering like puzzle pieces, made her comrades question her true origins. Why did someone so despised possess such superior skills? And was that faint scar on her left arm, delicate as a faded sketch, a mark from a failed mission or just a mundane accident? Kane once tried probing indirectly, but Emily only offered a faint smile, a delicate mask hiding her pain, leaving the conversation in awkward humor, as if she were playing a game of "my secrets are mine." The cracks in Emily's facade grew clearer, not through words but through small actions, shifting her teammates from contempt to suspicion, a subtle shift, planting seeds for bigger questions about the past she was hiding. Tension erupted like a winter storm sweeping through the dense forests near Tacoma, Washington, where towering pine trees stood sentinel, guarding the storied history of Joint Base Lewis McChord. During a tactical training exercise designed to mimic a brutal hostage rescue in the Middle East, Captain Marcus Hale saw his chance to break Emily Carter, the enigmatic rookie he'd always viewed as a stain on his elite unit. Under the dim glow of dawn, as the breath of 400 soldiers mingled with icy fog, Emily was assigned the weakest role in the team remote overwatch on a hill, armed only with a radio and a map, while her teammates charged into a simulated showdown with enemies lurking in the woods. Hale, with a smug grin like a Super Bowl coach, believed this was his moment to expose her incompetence, as if she were a misplaced extra in a Hollywood action flick. But what he didn't anticipate was that this moment would ignite a truth so staggering it would leave the entire base reeling, a story that Americans, from Seattle coffee shops to Iowa farmhouses, wouldn't stop talking about. Emily's team failed miserably. Tactical errors piled up from misjudging the enemy's position to sloppy team coordination, resulting in the hostage being killed in the simulation, an outcome any SEAL would consider a crushing disgrace. In the heavy atmosphere, as teammates trudged back with faces drenched in sweat and disappointment, Hale stood on the command platform, his voice booming like a speech in Times Square, pinning every failure on Emily. He berated her for failing to support, calling her a liability to the team, as if she were a broken-down truck clogging I-5. Her teammates, from Sergeant Laura Kane to young recruits from Florida, bowed their heads in silence, partly out of shame, partly in quiet agreement with Hale. They hadn't forgotten the rumors of spy or weirdo swirling around Emily. But she stood there, unflinching, her demeanor calm, clutching her worn leather journal tightly, her eyes sharp as the Puget Sound's icy waters, sending a shiver through a few onlookers who wondered if they'd misjudged a human being. In a surge of fury, Hale, with the arrogance of an Iraq war veteran, decided to push things to the breaking point. He summoned the entire Unit 400 soldiers lined up neatly on the training field, where the scent of damp earth and chirping birds blended into a scene both serene and tense. With a tone like he was delivering a verdict in a military courtroom, Hale commanded, "Carter, strip off your uniform now. If you've got anything to prove you're worthy, show it." The crowd fell silent, the air thick as before a boxing match in Las Vegas. A few soldiers stifled chuckles, expecting Emily's downfall like a contestant voted off American Idol. But Emily, her face unwavering, slowly removed her outer jacket, revealing the Iron Wolf tattoo between her shoulder blades, a snarling wolf encircled by lightning bolts and 7 gleaming stars, as if etched by the souls of warriors. That tattoo wasn't just art, it was a declaration from distant battlefields, evoking the legendary SEALs who'd sacrificed for America. Hale, at first, let out a scornful laugh, thinking it was a cheap show-off move, like a tattoo from a Santa Monica beach parlor. But the SEAL general in command, a man with piercing eyes honed over years in San Diego, observing from a distance, suddenly paled. He charged through the crowd, swift as a gust from the Cascade Mountains, shouting, "Stop! That's the symbol of Midnight Falcon!" The air froze. Teammates from Kane to the rookies stood stunned, feeling like they'd just watched a war movie pivot to an unexpected twist. Emily's tattoo wasn't merely personal, it was a legacy of sacrifice. A symbol every American soldier knew: the Midnight Falcon team, heroes who'd written history with blood and courage. This moment laid bare Emily's true character. Not a weak rookie, but a restrained force. A warrior in hiding, making everyone question her past and wonder, how badly had they misjudged her? Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. The moment the Iron Wolf tattoo blazed like a flame across the training field at Joint Base Lewis McChord, the air grew heavy, as if a blizzard were about to sweep through the Cascade Mountains. Emily Carter stood there, amid 400 silent soldiers, her gaze locked on the SEAL general in command, a man with a weathered face, carved as if from the granite of the Rockies, carrying memories from Afghanistan's battlefields. The snarling wolf tattoo between her shoulder blades, framed by lightning bolts and 7 gleaming stars, wasn't just a personal mark, it was like a victory flag, evoking the legendary SEALs who'd sacrificed for America. Captain Marcus Hale, who just ordered her humiliation, stood frozen, his initial sneer of contempt now melting into panic, as if he'd realized he was holding a live grenade with the pin pulled. But this moment wasn't just about revealing strength. It was the spark for a deeper truth. A story that Americans from San Diego dive bars to Nebraska cornfields would share endlessly, like a tale of courage triumphing over prejudice. Emily didn't lash out, didn't shout or accuse. She stood tall, shoulders square, her eyes deep as the Puget Sound at night, meeting the SEAL general's gaze. He, with over 30 years in the service, froze. Memories of a covert 2012 mission in Afghanistan flooding back, a memory only those who'd survived hell could grasp. Emily, he realized, was the sole survivor of the Midnight Falcon team, the legendary warriors who'd lost 11 comrades to keep plutonium from terrorists. A mission the Pentagon only whispered about in classified reports. A heavy silence blanketed the field, broken only by the wind rustling through Tacoma's forests, as if nature itself held its breath. Emily, with the calm of someone seasoned by pressure, broke her facade with a deliberate act. She slowly pulled her worn leather journal from her pocket, the same journal Sergeant Laura Kane once suspected was an eccentric's diary. But as she opened it before the stunned crowd, its pages revealed not personal musings but detailed reports on the unit's strengths and weaknesses, from Kane's marksmanship to the recruits' lack of coordination. Each line, written in crisp black ink, as neat as an Independence Day speech, was proof of her silent dedication to improving the team, despite their scorn. The emotional peak hit like a wave, quiet but powerful enough to stir hearts. Emily, with a low but clear voice, spoke briefly of her fallen comrades. Friends who'd laughed by campfires in Kabul, shared MREs in the desert, and ultimately gave their lives so she could live and carry on their mission. They died so we could live, she said, a gentle but piercing reminder that made the crowd feel the weight of sacrifice. Kane, who'd led the mocking taunts, bowed her head, eyes red as if she'd just watched a gut-wrenching war movie on Netflix. Hale, now silent like a lost audience member in a theater, felt sweat trickle down his brow despite the chilly air. Emily's act, not to boast but to protect, not to retaliate but to forgive, revealed her true character, a hidden SEAL warrior, bearing the scars of her past, yet choosing to serve with knowledge and compassion. A light moment of humor flickered when a rookie, trying to mask his embarrassment, whispered to his neighbor, "She's like Captain America, no shield needed." A faint chuckle rippled through. Quickly stifled by spreading shame, they'd been wrong to judge her by her ordinary appearance. Emily needed no more words to prove herself. The Iron Wolf tattoo, the journal, and her gaze said it all. She wasn't a victim but a silent hero, choosing restraint amid prejudice to uphold the values America cherishes: courage, sacrifice, and teamwork. The crowd, shifting from contempt to awe, felt the weight of a story that, from Reddit forums to Seattle coffee shop chats, people would retell as a lesson in never underestimating someone. But this story isn't over. Are you curious to know what the SEAL General does next, and whether Emily's actions will change the base forever? If you walk away now, you'll miss a greater truth, a moment that could make all of America rethink itself. The reaction erupted like a tsunami crashing through Joint Base Lewis McChord, where the Tacoma forests still echoed with the wind from the moment Emily Carter's Iron Wolf tattoo was revealed. After that stunning instant on the training field, when the truth of her legendary SEAL past came to light, the base's atmosphere shifted, as if all of America had just witnessed a game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. Emily's story, from a despised rookie to a symbol of courage, spread like wildfire, not just through military corridors but across online forums, from Reddit to Twitter, where Americans from coast to coast couldn't stop sharing it. This wasn't just a tale of justice, it was a profound reminder of the values Americans hold dear: resilience, loyalty, and the courage to right wrongs, values etched deep from the fields of Gettysburg to the battlegrounds of Iraq. Captain Marcus Hale, once standing tall like a bronze statue in Philadelphia's Liberty Square, now faced unavoidable consequences. Just hours after the incident, he was summoned to the commander's office, where senior officers, with stern gazes like Supreme Court justices, launched an investigation into his discriminatory behavior and security violations. The outcome hit as fast as a Florida summer storm. Hale was demoted, transferred out of the elite unit, and became the talk of the mess halls, where whispers mixed humor with sarcasm. Hale thought he was Rambo, but turned out to be just a misplaced extra. His downfall wasn't merely personal punishment, it sent a powerful message that gender bias, whether in the military or beyond, has no place in modern America. Sergeant Laura Kane, who'd once led the jeers against Emily, stood before the unit on a foggy morning, her face flushed like the fiery autumn hills of New England. With a trembling voice, she admitted she'd been blind to true strength. A public apology that left her mocking comrades bowing their heads, feeling as if they'd been doused with ice-cold Pacific water. Rookies who'd once shunned Emily in the mess hall now lined up to shake her hand, as if she were a country star stepping off the Grand Ole Opry stage. The SEAL General, a San Diego legend with silver hair like La Jolla's waves, addressed the entire unit, his voice resonant as the national anthem before a World Series game. He declared Emily not just a soldier but a SEAL icon surviving to teach. A statement that sent shivers through the base, as if they'd just witnessed a moment as historic as Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches. Beyond the base, Emily's story spread like a prairie fire across Kansas. On Reddit, the military forum exploded with the hashtag #IronWolfHero, where veterans from New York to California posted lengthy reflections, sharing how they'd learned not to judge others by appearances. Twitter, where every viral story finds its spotlight, overflowed with tweets from young soldiers to military journalists, calling Emily a beacon of change. A Texas veteran, with a touch of light humor, wrote, "I thought SEALs were all bearded and brawny, but Carter made me rethink the whole damn world." Military units across the U.S., from Fort Bragg to Camp Pendleton, began reviewing training protocols, ensuring no one was sidelined for their gender or looks. The Pentagon, in a rare move, secretly awarded Emily an honor medal, delivered in a plain envelope, as if it were a thank you note from an old friend. This shift wasn't just personal recognition for Emily. It planted seeds for a new culture of respect in the U.S. military, where values like sacrifice and loyalty outshine prejudice. From a scorned rookie, Emily became an inspiration, a story any American from Iowa farmers to Manhattan office workers could relate to, like a lesson in rising after being knocked down. But this story isn't over. Will Emily's journey keep inspiring, or is an even bigger change awaiting America? 5 years after the Iron Wolf tattoo shook Joint Base Lewis McChord, Emily Carter stood in a wind-swept corridor at the Pentagon in Virginia, gazing out at the Potomac River shimmering like a ribbon of silk under the sunset, where patrol boats evoked America's steadfast resolve. Now 33, she was no longer the scorned rookie but a SEAL training advisor, a role that any American, from Iowa farmers to Washington, D.C. journalists, would see as a symbol of rising above. The snarling wolf tattoo between her shoulder blades, once exposed in a moment of humiliation, had become a badge of honor, etched on a memorial for her 11 fallen comrades at the Navy Monument in San Diego. No longer a painful scar, it transformed into a symbol of rebirth, like the Olympic flame rekindled, reminding the U.S. military of the quiet strength hidden in seemingly ordinary people. Emily's story, a journey from darkness to light, was a healing balm not just for her but for millions of Americans, from Seattle coffee shops to Manhattan's bustling streets, who craved a tale of justice and hope. Emily, her brown hair now slightly longer but still neatly military-styled, stood there, clutching her worn leather journal, the constant companion once mocked by teammates as a high schooler's diary. But now, its pages held training improvement reports, written with the precision of an MIT scientist, which had saved hundreds of new soldiers through safer tactical simulations. Each line was a testament to her commitment, to ensure no teammate would fall like her Midnight Falcon comrades years ago. The change Emily sparked didn't stop at Lewis McChord. It rippled to SEAL units across America, from Coronado to Virginia Beach, where officers now used her methods to build cohesive teams, regardless of gender or background. A touch of gentle humor surfaced when a young recruit, during a Fort Bragg training session, dubbed her the Silent Wolf, a nickname that sparked laughter across the team, but also recalled the Iron Wolf tattoo. Now a symbol of unassuming courage. The image of Emily stepping onto La Push Beach in Washington, where Pacific waves crashed against rocks like an eternal hymn, carried the memories of her fallen comrades. The salty sea breeze whipped through her hair, as if whispering comfort from those friends in Afghanistan, who'd once shared MREs and silly jokes by campfires. For the first time, Emily smiled, not the strained smile of an isolated rookie, but the serene smile of someone who'd found peace after years of carrying invisible scars. This scene, subtle yet powerful, like a Norman Rockwell painting, touched American hearts. Never judge someone by their appearance, for true heroes often hide, waiting for their moment to shine. Like a lighthouse guiding through a storm, Emily's story wasn't just personal. It was a reminder of the values America cherishes, from the teamwork of the Seattle Seahawks to the bravery of World War II soldiers. The San Diego Memorial, where the Iron Wolf tattoo was carved into marble, now drew hundreds of soldiers and visitors yearly, like a smaller version of DC's Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall. It didn't just honor Emily's 11 comrades. It stood as a symbol of healing from misguided prejudices to belated recognition. Emily, as a training advisor, often returned to Lewis McChord, where she'd once been despised, to share her story, inspiring young recruits from across America, from Montana ranches to Chicago neighborhoods. The story closed with her standing on the beach, journal in hand, the sea breeze carrying her comrades' memories, like a vow that their sacrifices would live on. But are you curious, will Emily's story keep inspiring a generation, or is one final secret waiting to be unveiled? And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.
"Don't touch my dad." The scream shouted across the high school courtyard. A black father was pinned to the ground by police, glasses broken, blood trickling from his temple. Students crowded around, phones raised, recording as he stayed silent, offering no resistance. His daughter sobbed, hands trembling in helplessness. But then, a veteran in the crowd froze his eyes. locked on the man's bleeding arm. A scar, long and precise, like a surgical cut from the battlefield. The kind of scar only someone who had survived Fallujah would carry. An ordinary father or a secret SEAL veteran? The sound landed hard and dry, like a ball dropping onto concrete. But no, this wasn't children playing. It was the body of a middle-aged man collapsing, salt and pepper hair scattering across cracked cement. His black-framed glasses flew off, shattering into glittering fragments under the afternoon sundae. In that instant, the noisy schoolyard fell silent, as if someone had squeezed the sound out of the world. His daughter Jasmine was being held back by a teacher, trying to stop her from rushing forward. Tears streamed down her face, her broken cries slicing into the hearts of everyone who heard. Her classmates stood frozen, phones raised, unconsciously recording every second of the horror. For a moment, the courtyard, usually filled with bells, sneakers screeching on the court, had become the scene of a father brought down before his child's eyes. The man didn't fight back. He didn't yell, didn't struggle, just let his arms fall slack while the officer's knee pressed into his back. His silence was so strange it unsettled everyone. It wasn't the silence of weakness. It was a void, a chilling familiarity, as if he had lived through moments like this too many times to react anymore. Lieutenant Keller, the school resource officer, flushed red, veins bulging in his neck as if he were grappling with a deadly enemy. His eyes blazed with power, or was it fear? Hard to tell. The way Keller twisted the man's wrist, wrenched it back, and snapped on the steel cuffs, created an image so warped, so unjust, the students couldn't hold back their shouts. He didn't do anything. Why are you hitting him? The strangest part was how clear it all was. Minutes earlier, he had simply stood there, lunchbox and folder in hand, waiting for his daughter to come out of class. Just another dad, like dozens of others. Yet now he was treated like a dangerous intruder. The scene felt like a film spliced wrong, where the innocent was mislabeled criminal with a single misplaced glance. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows of the students encircling him, like a ring of witnesses to tragedy. The air reeked of concrete dust, sweat, and the cold bite of steel cuffs. The familiar schoolyard had turned into an invisible battlefield, and in the center lay the silent father, a stone, unmoved in a raging current. There was something in that silence that made people doubt. Could this be more than just an ordinary dad? Could his past carry more weight than this school would ever imagine? None of them knew that the man being dragged away had once commanded a SEAL unit in the firestorms of Iraq, where he led dozens of Marines back from the edge of death. But that truth was only beginning to surface. All right then, my dear audience, if you're watching and find this story gripping, drop a comment with the number 1, or write "I'm still here" to keep listening. The lunchbox still lay on its side, lid popped open, revealing a hastily wrapped sandwich, a few browned apple slices, and a small milk carton meant for a student. An image so ordinary, so domestic, yet lying exposed in the middle of a scene tense as a battlefield. The crowd of students stared, struggling to believe that the dangerous evidence Officer Keller was exaggerating was nothing more than the lunch a father had packed for his daughter. His name was Marcus Hayes. 50 years old, tall and lean, shoulders a little stiff from old injuries. In the school's records, he was known as a mentor for minority students, passionate about STEM. People often saw him at the whiteboard, marker in hand, carefully explaining how to program a small robot, or smiling gently as he encouraged a student fumbling with circuits. No one could have imagined that same image alongside the sight of him pinned beneath a school officer's knee. Marcus never shouted. Not a single protest left his lips.
He only raised his head enough to meet his daughter's eyes. Jasmine, thrashing in her teacher's arms, tears streaming.
He shook his head slowly, sending a message without words. Don't be afraid, I'm okay. Maybe he wanted to reassure her. Maybe he wanted to teach her the hardest lesson of youth, that not every injustice can be screamed down. The report wrote, subject refused to present identification, suspicious behavior, possible threat to school security. It read like dialogue from a cheap police drama, but dozens of eyewitnesses told a different story. They saw a man standing quietly, holding a thin folder and a lunchbox, waiting for his daughter, just like countless other parents. Nothing stood out except his skin color and the strange tension carved into the officer's face. Marcus's silence unsettled people. In a world where everyone scrambles to justify themselves, where every word is a counterattack, his quiet seemed almost unnatural. It didn't feel like submission, it felt deliberate. A silence chosen, purposeful, as if he knew that arguing would only make things worse. Or perhaps as if he was hiding something he wasn't ready to reveal in public. A few students whispered, pointing at his arm. When he fell, his sleeve had slipped up, exposing a scar long, deep, healed, but still stark, like a steel stitch across his skin. Not a common wound. Clean, precise, almost as if sewn under battlefield conditions. To most, it was just an old scar. But to a veteran in the crowd, it was instantly familiar, the kind of mark carried for life by those who had survived Iraq or Afghanistan. No one could understand. Why would an ordinary father remain so silent while being humiliated in front of his child? Why was there no fear in his eyes, only a calm so strange it felt unshakable? And that scar, was it a clue to a past no one that could have imagined? Who really was Marcus Hayes? And why had he chosen silence instead of defending himself right then and there? And before we continue with the rest of the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit like on this video. Oh, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. The phone trembled in the hand of a 12th grader as he kept recording while Marcus was dragged away. He barely thought about it, just acted on instinct. The reflex of his generation. Hit record. An hour later, the clip surfaced on TikTok. 4 hours after that, it hit 5 million views. By the next morning, the hashtag #schoolyard takedown blanketed social media. The little schoolyard, once known only for basketball games, was now on every evening newscast. People shared, commented, argued. Furious captions blazed red across screens. If not for the video, he would have been a criminal in the record. Another parent wrote, "This isn't just about one father. This is about all of us, anyone who could have the truth twisted by a single police report. The power of an image cut through every excuse." Under pressure, a young civil rights attorney, Sarah Mitchell, stepped in. She quietly downloaded the video, compared it against Lieutenant Keller's official report. The result was a side-by-side expose, raw and undeniable. Suspect resisted, attempted to grab officer's weapon. Marcus standing still, hands loose at his sides, eyes locked on his daughter. Report: subject entered restricted area. Marcus standing just outside the gate, alongside dozens of other parents waiting for their kids. The two pictures laid next to each other looked like fragments from different worlds. On one side, rigid language and a cold report. On the other, living truth impossible to deny. Television networks aired the comparison nationwide. Commentators tried to stay composed, but their tone dripped with bitterness. In today's world, without a phone camera, justice might have gone another way. The school police department, cornered, repeated one phrase like a stuck cassette tape. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding. But the words didn't calm anyone, they only poured fuel on the fire. Because the public could see plainly, this wasn't misunderstanding. It was truth distorted. In cafes, on morning subway rides, the Marcus Hayes story became the hot topic. Some were furious. Others laughed bitterly. A man holding a lunchbox is a threat to school security. Welcome to America this year. The laughter carried no joy, it was sharp with irony. Jasmine, Marcus's daughter, unexpectedly became the face of outrage. The photo of her screaming in the schoolyard, hair tangled, arms outstretched toward her father, was reprinted in hundreds of papers. The private tragedy of one family had turned into a national symbol of injustice. Meanwhile, Marcus remained silent. He avoided the press, refused every interview. His silence only deepened curiosity. Why wouldn't he defend himself when the whole country seemed to stand with him? Was he hiding something bigger? Some people began digging deeper. They zoomed in on the scar on his arm in the video. They asked on veterans forums, "Who's seen a scar like that? Looks like a field surgery cut done under emergency conditions." Theories surfaced. He was military. He'd served on missions. Maybe he'd been somewhere out there, Fallujah, Ramadi, Kandahar. The more questions, the hotter the storm grew. And in the middle of it, news broke that a federal agency had called the school directly. Not the media, not a public letter, a discreet signal, urgent. Who in the government had made that call? And why would one seemingly ordinary man make the Pentagon step in? The next morning, before the sun could burn away the thin veil of mist over the schoolyard, the press had already crowded the entrance. Dozens of microphones were raised high, cameras sweeping from the front gate to every classroom window. The media waited for a press conference Lieutenant Keller had promised. He wanted to explain, to salvage the last scraps of his credibility. But just then, the old desk phone in the principal's office rang. The droning sound wasn't like an ordinary call. The voice on the other end was clipped, decisive, offering no introduction. "Do not make any further statements. The man yesterday is not an ordinary parent. He was a SEAL commander. Fallujah, 2004. He saved 12 Marines from an ambush. Secure the scene and await instructions." No more explanation was needed. The word Fallujah alone was enough to send chills through anyone who had followed the Iraq War. The principal froze, her fingers tightening around a pen, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. A father handcuffed in front of students, now revealed to be a battlefield hero. If made public, that information could flip the entire national conversation. That recess, not just students but reporters, began to sense something off. A few leaks from anonymous sources thickened the air. Then, by midday, black SUVs rolled slowly through the school gates. Flags gleamed on the hoods under the sunlight. Curious residents crowded the sidewalks, holding their phones high to capture every frame. The car door opened. Out stepped a 3-star Marine general. His uniform was immaculate, medals blazing across his chest. The crowd's noise fell away, replaced by a hush of unexpected reverence. The general walked straight toward Marcus. He was still seated, handcuffs unremoved, his quiet eyes following the scene unfolding around him. Reporters held their breath. Students pushed closer for a better look. Then the moment came. The general raised his hand in a crisp military salute. "Welcome back, Commander Hayes." The words rang out sharp and unyielding, like a rifle report on the training field. The entire crowd went silent. Some students gaped. A few parents exchanged bewildered looks, unable to believe their ears. In an instant, the man once branded a resisting suspect blazed into view as a national hero, right in the middle of the schoolyard, and camera shutters fired nonstop, capturing the unprecedented sight. A general saluting a father who just yesterday had been dragged like a criminal. Keller, pale as chalk, stepped back, sweat dotting his temple. Every argument he had prepared for the press conference dissolved into smoke. Jasmine, still trembling, suddenly saw her father's eyes soften. He smiled for the first time since the ordeal began. No words were needed. That smile alone told the world this was not a broken man, but a warrior who knew how to rise after everything. But the biggest question remained. What had driven a legendary SEAL commander to leave the military and become a quiet mentor in a school? And why had he chosen silence instead of revealing his identity from the start? Are you still with me, my dear viewer? Take a short break, maybe sip some water, and keep listening to the rest of this story. Drop a comment with the number 1 if you find this story gripping. And don't forget to hit subscribe.
The sound of Apache helicopters still thundered in Marcus's memory, like a soundtrack that never switched off. It was the kind of sound he could hear even with his eyes closed, decades after leaving the battlefield.
But before the rotor blades and the smell of gunpowder, Marcus Hayes was just a boy growing up on the outskirts of Atlanta, the son of a skilled mechanic. His grandfather had fought in World War II, though he rarely spoke of it. His father spent every day bent under car hoods, hands covered in grease, hoping his son could escape the cycle of poverty and prejudice. In high school, Marcus learned to keep his head down and walk faster to avoid trouble. A black kid from a working-class neighborhood was never considered safe in other people's eyes. While his friends looked toward college, he chose a different path, the military. Not out of patriotic fervor at first, but because it was the only narrow doorway open to a better life. The unforgiving discipline of the Navy SEALs turned the boy from the streets into a different man. Ice water slammed into his lungs, sand ground into his skin, drills designed to break even steel wheels. Yet Marcus endured, even found a strange calm in the pain. Some teammates joked that he had eyes that smiled even when crawling through mud. That quiet humor helped him survive where so many gave up. In 2004, Fallujah, Hell's Gates opened. Marcus, then a SEAL team commander, was ordered to coordinate with the Marines. A platoon of Marines was trapped in a city block, ammo running low, their radios spitting only static. Marcus led his men around the flank, threading through alleys laced with traps, clutching a C4 detonator in his hand. The streets were so tight, they could hear the enemy's ragged breathing on the other side of the wall.
When a PKM machine gun erupted from a rooftop, Marcus didn't hesitate. He blew the C4, bricks and dust exploding skyward, carving out an escape corridor for 12 Marines.
Shouts mingled with gunfire and the pounding of boots on shattered stone. They made it out, but Marcus lost 2 of his closest teammates. It was a price he would never forget. That night alone, he held a chipped dog tag in his hand and whispered their names, a promise to carry their memory for life. When he returned, Marcus carried a wrecked shoulder, a shard of metal lodged in bone, and an emptiness no doctor could heal. He left the military and chose a path few expected. Back to school. Not to teach dry theory, but to mentor minority students in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. He believed if kids had robots, 3D printers, coding in their hands, they'd think less about knives or pistols in their pockets. In the school's small lab, people often saw Marcus patiently guiding a stubborn student, or laughing when a robot suddenly wobbled like it was drunk. That patience didn't come from textbooks, but from the memory of someone who knew what it meant to be inches from death. So, when he stood at the school gate every afternoon with a lunchbox in his hand, no one imagined that ordinary father had once commanded a SEAL team in the inferno of Fallujah. From battlefield hell to a quiet schoolyard, Marcus's journey was a paradox. A man who once led soldiers through death, now choosing to guard youth from losing their way with math problems and circuit boards. But would the world allow him peace with that choice? Or would Fallujah's past drag him into a new confrontation, this time on American soil? The first sound wasn't gunfire, nor the shouts of a battlefield. It was the dry, heavy strike of a gavel in a federal hearing room. That echo marked the beginning of a different kind of fight, not with bombs, but with law and public judgment. After the three-star general's salute, the case was no longer in the school's hands. The Department of Justice and the Federal Education Committee quickly launched a full investigation. Stacks of thick files, every report, every clip were laid out before the lawmakers. The name Keller School Police Lieutenant was spoken with a tone as cold as a formal indictment. Keller was suspended within the first week. Internal files revealed a trail of complaints against him for racial profiling, stopping black students without cause, writing citations without evidence. Those complaints had once been buried in drawers, but now, under the spotlight, they flared like embers caught in the wind. Some parents sighed bitterly. If not for the video, it would have been buried again. The school police department faced unprecedented pressure. The federal committee demanded reforms in training, mandatory courses on implicit bias, and tighter oversight of every patrol. One representative even sneered. If they'd spent time teaching officers the difference between a sandwich and a gun, we wouldn't be here today. A ripple of laughter broke through the tension, a moment of humor edged with bitterness. Meanwhile, outside the hearing room, a parent coalition formed almost overnight. They called themselves Justice for Marcus. Signs reading "No more silence" and "Schools must be safe for all" rose above the streets. What began as a march of dozens swelled into thousands. The crowd carried images of Marcus and Jasmine, turning their family into a symbol of a broader reform. Marcus himself, though, stayed silent. At the hearings, he sat calm, steady, like in the days of Fallujah, waiting for the right moment to act. Reporters tried to pry words from him, but he left only one short statement. "I don't care about titles. I just want my daughter to see that even when you're treated unjustly, you can still keep discipline." The words weren't shouted, not dramatic, but they were enough to hush the entire room. A former SEAL who had once led men through hell now simply wanted to teach his daughter how to hold her dignity against the injustices of ordinary life. That testimony spoke louder than any defense could. But the most surprising moment came from Jasmine. The girl who had screamed in desperation in the schoolyard now stood with a chance to speak for her father. Judges, reporters, even the marchers in the streets turned their eyes to her. She was no longer the trembling child clutched in her teacher's arms, but a young woman who had witnessed a harsh truth and carried a voice the nation was waiting to hear. Would Jasmine simply tell her own story of pain, or would she turn that experience into a declaration for an entire generation? 1 year later, a clear May sky, sunlight spilling across the high school football field where graduation was being held. In the bleachers, hundreds of parents crowded together, waving small flags, raising phones to capture the moment. The drums rolled, blue gowns and square caps filled the air like flocks of fledgling birds learning to fly. Amid the excitement, Marcus sat quietly in the front row. He wore an old suit jacket, the seams slightly frayed, but on his lapel was pinned a small insignia, the sealed trident, gleaming under the Sunday. It wasn't for show, but a silent mark. A few veterans scattered throughout the stands noticed instantly. They nodded, sending an unspoken salute. "I know who you are." Jasmine's name was called. The girl with curly hair, now a young woman, walked to the wooden podium with steady steps. A year ago, her image crying out in the schoolyard had shaken the nation. Today, she stood here before thousands to raise a voice that was no longer just her own. The mic clicked on. A summer breeze flipped the paper in her hands, covered in hurried scribbles. Her voice trembled at first, but within moments grew firm. That day, I saw my dad dragged down right in front of me. I saw him not resist. I heard him call names that weren't true. But then I learned the truth. My dad once saved 12 Marines in the middle of fire. And he taught me something, that justice can be delayed, but truth never dies. The stadium fell silent. Thousands of eyes fixed on her. Some parents raised tissues to their faces. The students, routed just minutes before, now sat still, caught in something sacred. Jasmine paused, drew a deep breath, and looked down at the front row, where Marcus sat tall. His eyes met hers, full of pride. She smiled, then went on. "My dad isn't just my hero. He's a hero for this country. But above all, he's the father who taught me to stand strong, even when the whole world tries to push me down." The first clap rang out from the top row. Then, like a wave, the entire stadium rose, applauding without end. The sound roared through the stands, like rain hammering on a tin roof, relentless, powerful. Marcus stayed seated, head bowed, eyes wet, his broad hands clasped tightly, not to hold back anger as they had a year before, but to steady the flood of emotion. He didn't raise a hand, didn't try to claim the spotlight. His silence, the same familiar silence this time, carried no pain, only pride. From another corner, a young reporter snapped the shot, Marcus with his hand over his chest as Jasmine bowed. That image would later grace front pages. Father, teacher, silent hero. The ceremony ended with one last toss of caps, students shouting in waves of joy. But the applause for Jasmine and Marcus lingered on. Those close to him touched his shoulder, whispering, "Thank you." Marcus only smiled, nodded, and clutched the graduation gift his daughter had just placed in his hands. Overhead, confetti smoke still drifted, mingling with sunlight. It was the perfect end to a school year, but also the beginning of a new legacy. Jasmine had proven that the voice of one young person could shift the vision of an entire community. And Marcus, who once led comrades through the inferno of Fallujah, now passed that same flame of resilience to the next generation.
The story of Marcus Hayes closed in the sound of applause at graduation, but deep down, we know the journey isn't over. Because beyond the stadium lights, America still has its shadows.
Families still face prejudice. Fathers and mothers still endure in silence so their children can move forward. Marcus became a symbol not because he was a SEAL commander, but because he taught us a simple lesson. True strength isn't in shouting the loudest, but in holding discipline even when the world tries to bring you down. That story brings healing to all of us, reminding us that justice may be delayed, but truth never disappears. It is a reminder for every parent, every student, every person trying to stand tall in a complicated society. And Jasmine, through her speech, showed that a new generation is ready to raise its voice, carrying forward her father's silent yet proud legacy. But is this really the final chapter, or just the beginning of a longer journey? When the past of Fallujah remains untold, when the truth about fallen brothers still lingers in the dark, Are you ready to follow us into part 2 and uncover it? If you believe that silent heroes deserve to be remembered, share this video with your friends and loved ones across America. Let them know that there are stories that cannot be buried in silence.
They had stopped sending signals. The SEAL team was trapped between the cliffs of Black Canyon. No reinforcements, no escape route, not a single UAV in the sky. Not because of any ban, but because no one dared to fly into the place that had nearly swallowed the entire squad last time. The same mountain crevice, the same trap. But this time there was no plan B. No safety waiting behind. Only silence. Until the ground trembled with a deep, harsh sound, slicing rapidly across the mountain slopes. It was not the sound of rescue. It was a roar of vengeance, tearing through the void like thunder across a shredded sky. A seal whispered, as if afraid his own voice would shatter the impossible. No, she's back. And all the survivors looked up, because they knew, every time that roar echoed, a legend stepped out of the shadows. The rumors about her never disappeared. They weren't recorded in military reports, nor did they appear on any official files. They lived in the neon-lit bars, in grocery stores smelling of weak coffee, and in the knowing nods exchanged among veterans who were far more accustomed to other people's failures than to examining their own. Her name was Sarah Miller. In Buena Vista, Colorado, that name once stood for pride. The only A-10 pilot in the squadron, someone who flew so close that her wheels nearly brushed the treetops. But one day, it became a warning sign. The press labeled her the disgrace of the Air Force. Over time, the story became legend in that small community. A dive gone wrong, a half-second delayed signal, and nearly the entire squadron wiped out over the skies of Afghanistan. She was grounded. No hearings, no defenses. Just a single order folded neatly into a white envelope. Now, every morning, Sarah drove a faded green delivery truck, dropping off supplies at the local supermarket. No uniform, no medals. Only a worn baseball cap bearing a faded A-10 logo remained. The hat reminded people of her, and then they immediately looked away. The community still honored veterans, erecting memorials in the Central Park, flying flags on porches. But for Sarah, they offered the gaze of an outsider. In bars, sometimes someone would half-jokingly say, "The pilot who almost sent the whole squadron to the hereafter." A hoarse laugh would echo briefly, then vanish as she walked past. Sarah didn't argue, didn't justify herself. At night, neighbors heard the whirring from the garage. Not the television, not the radio. It was the plastic propeller of a remote-controlled model plane. A child's toy, people thought. But for Sarah, it was the only way her hands could remember the feel of flying. In the darkness, her eyes tracked the tiny model looping in circles, as if trying to hold on to something lost forever. She lived like a shadow. Only one detail betrayed that silence. The faded tattoo on her right arm, the words, "No one left behind," embracing the A-10 insignia. A vow never retracted, even though everyone else had withdrawn their faith in her. The paradox was this. The townspeople believed in loyalty, believed in sacrifice, yet they so easily forgot a pilot who once flew to save them. Sarah became living proof of a truth nobody wanted to admit. Sometimes society doesn't want the truth, it just wants a name to blame. The small town continued its daily rhythms. People still strolled along the Arkansas River, still photographed the snow-capped mountains in the distance. But in a dark corner on the town's edge, one woman waited quietly. Not for forgiveness, but for the single moment that would prove all those whispers wrong. The question is, when that moment comes, will anyone still dare to face the truth head-on? People often say, if a secret is important enough, it will find a way to reveal itself. For Sarah, that happened on a seemingly meaningless morning. The small delivery truck rocked along the dusty road leading to the repair shop, where the smell of oil and burning metal lingered in the air. Sarah was all too familiar with this rhythm, delivering a few boxes of parts, signing a couple of papers, giving a quick nod, and disappearing before anyone could stare too long. The town had framed her into the role of a delivery woman. She had let that frame confine her until the thread on her old jacket pocket tore. A small piece of metal fell onto the concrete floor, producing a dry, sharp clink that sounded unusually loud among the machinery. Sarah bent down to pick it up, but another hand was faster. It was a young soldier, his face still carrying the innocence of 20 years, wearing an oil-stained t-shirt, eyes shining as if he had just seen a treasure. In his hand was a worn challenge coin, engraved with the emblem of the 303rd Fighter Squadron, the Hog Drivers. That symbol was unmistakable, the A-10 Warthog, wings like blades, representing a spirit fearless and unyielding. The young soldier's eyes lit up with excitement. To him, it wasn't a chipped coin, it was proof of a legend. Sarah froze for a moment. Part of her wanted to smile faintly at his naivete. Another part felt her heart tremble. She snatched the coin back. The motion was quick and decisive, like an old reflex that hadn't faded. The coin disappeared into her pocket, leaving a brief silence between them. But the soldier had already seen it. Not just the symbol, but her trembling hand holding it, trembling not from fear, but from memories rushing back. The shell Sarah had built over many years, a silent woman, just a shadow of her past cracked in that instant. Since being grounded, Sarah had lived by small routines. She controlled them as meticulously as a pilot checks the cockpit before takeoff. At exactly 5 a.m., black coffee. At 6 a.m., start the truck. At 9 p.m., a small model airplane looping above the empty lot behind the garage. Not a single beat could falter, because any gap, no matter how small, would unleash the flood of memories. Yet that young soldier had just created such a gap. In his eyes, Sarah glimpsed what she had lost. Absolute faith that flying meant freedom, meant power, meant never leaving a teammate behind. And painfully, she had once embodied that faith. News of the 303rd had spread across the base. The Hog Drivers flew so low that soldiers on the ground could see the pilot's eyes in the cockpit. They were respected for one reason: never abandoning anyone on the battlefield. Even when flying over valleys where radars were blind, where a cheap RPG could turn a warthog into a pile of scrap, Sarah had carried that belief on her back. A belief so big it became a burden. One dive gone wrong, a single second's delay in formation, and reverence turned into condemnation. She had lived with that condemnation for years, burying it in silence. But that coin, seemingly just a piece of worn metal, tore that silence apart. Ironically, while the town saw her as a failure, that young soldier saw something in her she had forgotten, proof that legends aren't made by chance. They're forged with sweat, blood, and scars no one wants to mention. And in that moment, Sarah realized something. Some memories never truly vanish. They lie in wait, like the faded warthog sitting under the eaves of some base, gathering dust but far from dead. That night, back home, Sarah spent hours staring at the coin. Her rough fingers traced its scratched surface as if trying to touch the cockpit she once knew. Under the pale yellow light, her face revealed a thin smile, half bitter, half proud, a smile the town had long forgotten. She knew her shell had just cracked, and once a crack appears, what's hidden inside will find a way to escape. When everything is exposed, will she fall again, or will this be the moment she soars back? Can you guess what happens next? Relax for a moment, comment, 1, or I'm still here, to keep following along. Accidents never knock before they enter. They usually arrive unexpectedly, as if choosing the exact moment when someone lets their guard down. A week after the brush with her past, Fate came for Sarah, though she had no idea. In western Colorado, the joint exercise between the SEALs and the Air Force was supposed to be a familiar scenario: a transport helicopter carrying elite soldiers, simulating an ambush, then finding a way to retreat. A war game, nothing more. But that game twisted within a few short seconds. The simulated air defense system, which was only supposed to fire lasers to mark targets, suddenly malfunctioned. A real warhead launched, tearing through the air. It didn't need long to find the hovering helicopter trapped in the Black Canyon Gorge. A crisp explosion echoed, like a full stop marking the end. The helicopter shuddered violently, black smoke erupting like a flag of death. The pilot struggled to maintain control, finally forced into an emergency landing on the jagged rock below. Inside, the SEAL team tumbled like puppets jerked by violent strings, bones colliding with steel, blood spreading across the floor. No one died instantly, but with each passing minute, their chance of survival narrowed. They sent distress signals. The radio waves slammed into the sheer canyon walls, then faded. Only a few weak fragments escaped, drifting through the chaotic air layers. In the command room at Peterson Air Force Base, officers strained at the blinking screens, interrupted signals like whispers from ghosts. A young commander sighed, his voice heavy. No aircraft can get into that gorge. No one. It wasn't just a technical truth, it was a verdict. Black Canyon was notorious for its treacherous terrain, vertical cliffs like razor blades, unpredictable whirlwinds, and a space so narrow that even the most seasoned pilots called it the Stone Tomb. Satellites couldn't penetrate, radars were useless. Entering meant signing your own obituary. In the silence, a raspy voice broke through. An older officer, decades of flying etched into his eyes, cloudy yet still sharp with the cold clarity of one who had witnessed too many accidents. He looked at no one, just muttered, "There was someone who once did it." The room held its breath. Young officers turned to listen. The old man slowly lifted his head. His voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like stone. Sarah Collins. That name had long vanished from official records, existing only as a shadow in stories told at the base bar. A pilot who had once flown a battered A-10 Warthog through terrain everyone deemed impossible. A pilot who had pulled 12 SEALs from the jaws of death, and the only pilot ever grounded after surviving because the price of audacity was a casualty list the higher-ups never wanted mentioned. In the minds of those who had witnessed it, Sarah was an uncomfortable secret, both a source of pride and a shameful wound. People didn't know whether to remember her as a hero or as a reckless risk-bringer. But now, with the SEAL team trapped at the bottom of Black Canyon, no one cared about labels. They knew only one thing: there was no other choice. Ironically, at the very moment her name was spoken, Sarah was on her routine delivery run. She even thought today was quieter than usual. Empty streets, coffee not too bitter, and the old playlist in her truck repeating a song she had heard thousands of times. Had she known that, at the same time a room full of officers was silently debating whether to call her name, she might have laughed a laugh both sarcastic and bitter. They needed her only when everything had fallen into chaos. But fate never asks permission. It knocks, and usually with a fist. Debate erupted in the command room. Some objected strongly. Sarah was grounded, not authorized. Others smirked, saying invoking her name was like clinging to an old legend. Yet amid the objections, the real question emerged. If not her, then who? Maps spread across the table, flight paths drawn and immediately crossed out. Every option led to dead ends. Only one memory remained, a memory of a woman who had done the impossible on a night of smoke and fire. The base colonel, known for his cold demeanor, finally closed the file. He spoke little, but his eyes delivered the decision: find her. And so, after years of silence, the sky called out for Sarah Collins once more. She had no idea. But fate had begun to move, like the blades of a plane slowly starting before roaring to full power. Some news drifts past ears and disappears like the wind. But there are other pieces of news which, once they reach the right person, turn into an irresistible call. For Sarah, it wasn't a cold administrative notice from the base, but a scattered fragment of information, spreading through the town like fire over dry grass. A SEAL team was trapped in Black Canyon, and no pilot dared to fly in for a rescue. Others heard it and shook their heads, calling it a distant tragedy. Sarah silently left the table, drove straight to the abandoned hangar on the outskirts. There, under a thick layer of dust, like a blanket of time, lay a steel beast that once roared across the skies of Afghanistan. A 10, serial number 81-0973. No one thought it still worked. Some even joked it was only good for scrap metal. But Sarah knew better than anyone. This beast was not easy to kill. She walked slowly along the fuselage, fingers tracing the cold metal, where scratches and dents spread like scars. Amid them, a small etched mark remained, a line left by her former squad mates. For those on the ground, to outsiders it was just a motto. To Sarah, it was a guiding principle, the only reason she had ever risked everything. Because on the ground, the soldiers waiting were not numbers on a report, they were flesh and blood teammates. She stood there for a long while, as if listening to the past whisper through the dust. Eyes that had once hardened to smoke and fire now shone, both resilient and fragile. Perhaps after all, she had never truly left the sky. She had merely buried her wings under the weight of ordinary life, waiting for fate to knock again. Night fell, and the town was silent. People assumed Sarah had returned to her worn apartment with only bookshelves and a flickering night lamp. But before dawn, the radars at Peterson AFB began blinking. A signal took off from the direction of the abandoned hangar. Not a modern F-16, nor a transport helicopter. Instead, on the screen appeared a name many technicians thought had been erased from the system. A-10C Thunderbolt 2, Serial 81-0973. The news spread like lightning through the command room. Chairs clattered, footsteps echoed. Officers rushed to the screens, unable to believe their eyes. Someone exclaimed, "Oh my God, it can still fly?" Then the commanding voice thundered, "Who authorized takeoff?" The answer came over the radio, hoarse, brief, impossible to interrupt. "Don't ask, they need me." No authentication code, no rigid protocol, just a familiar voice, carrying the weight of memory. In that moment, no officer doubted who was on the line. In the misty sky, the old A-10 screeched like a steel beast waking from a long slumber. The TF-34 engines roared, trailing thick gray smoke, yet still powerful enough to shake the window panes of nearby houses. Sarah sat in the cramped cockpit, everything at once alien and familiar. The old control panel, a few loose switches, dim screens, yet her hands moved instinctively. No thought required. Her body had been trained for this moment years ago. A moment of humor, if one could call it that, came as Sarah had to slam the electronic panel 3 times before the HUD screen lit. "Good thing I still know how to calm your stubborn self," she muttered, almost smiling. The aircraft seemed to respond with a deep, resonant scream. Back at the base, many officers were still arguing. Some demanded the A-10 return immediately. Others insisted the pilot had violated military orders. But amid the noise, one truth was undeniable. Out there, a SEAL team was still trapped. Time was not on their side, and only one aircraft was heading toward Black Canyon. Sarah knew the price she might pay. Failure would mean disappearing forever, not just from the sky, but from collective memory. But if she succeeded, perhaps for the first time in years, She could stand tall without feeling the past crush her shoulders. The steel beast shook violently as it raced toward the horizon, and somewhere in the old cockpit, Sarah whispered words no one could hear. "This time I will not leave them behind." Dear viewers, stay tuned for the next part. It's going to leave you in awe. Take a moment to leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always thrilling to see people joining us from all over the world. In the dense darkness of Black Canyon, no sound remained except for labored breathing and bullets ricocheting off the cliff walls. The SEAL team clung to the tiniest crevices on the mountainside, evading fire from malfunctioning simulated anti-aircraft guns while trying to keep their radios alive amid the weak signals. They were accustomed to no one arriving in time, accustomed to the cold finality of a lost connection. But accustomed did not mean ready to face the outcome. Then, suddenly, a deep roar echoed through the canyon. Unlike the familiar sounds of helicopters or modern fighters, it was a metallic, wild sound, the 30mm GAU-8 Avenger gun firing. Bullets rained down like shooting stars, tearing the ground apart, shredding the mock artillery emplacements into chaotic flames. The canyon walls reflected the roar, making it reverberate like endless thunder, shaking the hearts of those who heard it. The SEALs looked up. In the brief moment when fire and dust erupted, they saw the silvered, chipped paint of an A-10 streaking through the canyon. Its wings almost scraped the cliffs, sending small shards of rock hitting the ailerons and leaving bright white scratches. Yet the beast did not falter. It banked sharply, tilted, then roared again, firing as if ripping the entire sky apart. One SEAL gripped the radio, voice choking, almost crying. Amid the chaotic noise, a few words rang out clearly. She's really here. Ironheart is back." In the cramped cockpit, Sarah gripped the controls. Sweat seeped into her gloves, the HUD flickered on and off, but her eyes did not waver. She knew this aircraft was no longer perfect, knew every violent shake could be the last. But if she had to choose between falling and abandoning her teammates, she hesitated not a second. The A-10 was never built to be beautiful, but to endure. And in Sarah's hands, it did more than endure. It came alive. Tight loops, dives skimming the rock that many modern pilots would never dare, all became familiar rhythms. For a rare moment, Sarah almost laughed. When the plane shook violently after taking a hit, the pressure gauges spinning wildly, she muttered under her breath, "Don't sulk on me right now, old friend." And as if in reply, the engine roared louder than before, pushing the A-10 out of the hail of bullets. A strange, darkly humorous moment, but sometimes only those who have stared death in the face could understand it. On the ground, one simulated artillery emplacement after another was obliterated. Sarah wasn't aiming for perfection in each burst. She was aiming for one thing only, opening a corridor of life for the incoming rescue helicopter. Each exploding emplacement illuminated the air enough for the SEALs to know they were not being abandoned. But Black Canyon did not surrender easily. Another series of rounds hit the left wing, shaking the A-10 violently, spewing thick black smoke. Radar signals at Peterson AFB flickered chaotically. Many officers panicked, thinking the beast was about to fall. But in that canyon, Sarah had no right to let it crash. She yanked the stick hard, using her own battered fuselage to shield the helicopter daringly advancing into the canyon. The armor steel designed to protect the pilot now became a shield for an entire team on the ground. Once, twice, and on the third hit, the A-10 took more damage. Yet it still flew. How it did so remained a mystery. To the soldiers below, it was no longer metal and ammunition but a steel spirit, refusing to retreat until everyone was safe. Finally, the rescue helicopter touched down, wheels hitting the ground sharply. The battered but alive SEALs scrambled aboard. Above, the A-10 still patrolled, like a loyal hunting dog, ready to swallow any remaining danger. Only when the helicopter lifted off, leaving the canyon, did Sarah ease the controls slightly. Yet even then, the roar of the A-10's engines echoed like a warning to Black Canyon, "Don't touch them while I'm still here." Smoke trailed behind the plane, blending with the Colorado sky. To outsiders, it was the sign of a machine in its death throes, but to those who witnessed it that day, it was the mark of a legend rewritten. Sarah and the steel beast had carved a bloody path through Black Canyon, but how long could a smoking, battered A-10 continue to fly before fate came to collect its debt? The moment the helicopter blades touched the safe sky, the radio suddenly went silent. No guidance, no pounding heartbeat of the female pilot's voice. Only the wind howling through the canyon and the fading echo of the A-10's engines like a soul departing from a tragic stage. The SEALs looked at one another inside the helicopter. Each knew that someone had chosen to stay behind just to make sure they could go on. That night, Peterson Base descended into chaos. Officers scanned for emergency signals. Radars swept across the mountain ranges, but there was no trace of 81-0973. Young soldiers in the operations room tried to reassure one another that she would return. Yet as dawn broke over the horizon, the cold truth remained. Sarah had vanished, along with that silver beast. But what was lost was more than a pilot and an aircraft. What remained was a story, and that story wasted no time finding its way into the hearts of all America. The next day, newspapers from Colorado to New York reported an unnamed A-10 pilot had risked her life to save an entire SEAL team in Black Canyon. From the forgotten archives, the image of the aged Thunderbolt II suddenly appeared everywhere on television, front pages, and in every conversation at roadside diners. It was called The Miracle in the Canyon. Within hours, America seemed to reclaim a lost memory. Articles didn't just recount the battle, they traced the past of a woman once cast aside for an old mistake. Sarah, a name once paired with failure, was now etched as Ironheart. No longer a symbol of defeat, but proof of an eternal vow for those on the ground. On veteran forums, those who had served with the A-10 years ago returned, sharing tales of old planes saving them in distant valleys, dusty deserts. They said the A-10 never abandoned the troops on the ground. And now, all of America had seen once again that legends need not be polished, only loyal. In Buena Vista, a small cafe, usually crowded only on weekend mornings, a server watched in surprise as an elderly man placed an object on the counter. A worn military coin, etched with the insignia of a long-defunct unit. The veteran pushed it toward the young woman, whispering as if someone might overhear, "Return this to her, and tell her America owes her a bow." No one saw him leave. Only the heavy coin remained, cold as steel, yet carrying the weight of a nation reclaiming a piece of collective memory. In the following days, the story of Sarah did not stop at the newspaper. It became a topic in military classrooms, family dinners, even late-night talk shows, where a host jokingly called the A-10 the cranky grandmother of the Air Force, old, temperamental, yet not to be underestimated. Audiences laughed, then fell silent, remembering that someone had truly flown that ancient beast to become a living shield. And somewhere, amid the chatter, a question still lingered. Was Sarah alive, or had she remained in Black Canyon? A nation had looked at Sarah with new eyes. But would Sarah herself ever see that day, or would her name exist only in the stories retold? Thank you for joining us. Perhaps, like me, you sometimes wonder, do those who fight silently for others ever get recognized? Yet the most beautiful thing is, they don't need recognition. They don't need to be seen to shine. They only need a reason to keep going. Don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're watching from
and what time it is. It's always amazing to see someone joining us from around the world. Comment 1 if you enjoyed this story, so we can continue bringing you more incredible tales.
One sunny morning at Clearwater Harbor, Florida, veteran Charles Reed, 80 years old, stood before the iron gate of the local sailors' club, wearing his old Navy cap, his gaze as resolute as when he was 20. But he was stopped. A young manager, polite yet cold, said softly, "Sorry, this place is for active members only. You're no longer eligible." No longer eligible? A man who once commanded a rescue ship through the storm of 1971, who brought 18 young sailors back from the brink of death, now denied just because of his age and an outdated wooden boat? But 1 hour later, the Florida sky will roar with jet engines, a squadron will circle above the harbor, and a silent truth will be awakened. Are you ready to witness this emotional reversal? Don't forget to subscribe to the Veteran Best Stories channel, so you won't miss these heart-touching stories. Charles Reed was accustomed to the sound of waves pounding against the hull, and the salty taste always clinging dry to his collar. The sea had once been everything to him, where he grew up, where he came of age, where he lived and nearly died many times. The sea breeze had taught him how to stand firm amid chaos. The waves had taught him how to remain silent without being weak, and the years in the Navy had taught him how to hold lives in his hands, even when hope was as thin as a thread. He had been a commander, not the type to raise his hand and shout, but the type to look straight into the storm and know what to do. Cold, decisive, always the last to leave once everyone was safe. During the 1971 storm, when the world believed the rescue ship USS Harper was lost, it was he who kept everyone alive for 48 hours on the roaring sea. 18 young sailors returned, drenched and trembling, but alive. And in his hands was the makeshift radio, that old device he had repaired with copper wire from a broken transceiver and a hairpin from a young sailor. 49 years had passed. This morning, he returned to Clearwater Harbor, not to recall past achievements, not to be acknowledged, but simply to sit, to gaze at the sea, to watch young sails cutting through the water, and quietly remember a time. He came alone, with only his old gray windbreaker and a small wooden box he held in his hands. Inside lay the first-class medal, now tarnished, its metal surface scratched by time and storms. The Sailors' Club gate gleamed. The young gatekeeper looked polite, but his eyes revealed no empathy. "Sorry, sir. This place is for current members only. You don't have a valid pass." Charles slowly presented the old card. The paper blurred, the stamp faded. The guard looked at it, then shook his head, as if handed something from another century. "We updated the system. This card is no longer valid. And, to be honest, this place prioritizes modern boats. And you." He trailed off, but his gaze said it all. Charles did not argue. He only nodded silently, then turned his back. His steps felt heavy, not because of his body, but because of a dull ache, the kind that arrives when a deep part of you is brushed aside and no one bothers to look back. He left the gate, found a wooden bench near the shore, outside the member area. From there, he could still see boats docking, children playing with floats, laughter rising from the club. But it all felt as though it were happening in a world he no longer belonged to. He opened the wooden box, placed it on his lap, his hands trembling as he gently lifted the metal. Sunlight fell on it, but the metal only shimmered briefly before sinking into its aged bronze hue. Charles stared at it for a long time, as if trying to hear the waves of the past echo from this small object. No one was around to witness it, But if there were, they would see his eyes, quiet, but not empty. How he wished someone remembered. How he wished, at least once, someone looked at him not as an old man, but as someone who once kept a ship from sinking. The sea breeze still blew, the sails still raced ahead, but his heart was no longer at peace. Not because of being turned away, but because it made him realize a cruel truth. The world waits for no one to remember. Memories have no place in membership records. Loyalty, sacrifice, and the years he once called pride, all now confined in this old wooden box. Charles closed his eyes. He did not cry, but his breath faltered like a receding wave. He sat there, alone in broad daylight, amid the laughter of people who did not know what they had just missed. And in that silence, Charles did not know that. In just 1 hour, the sky above him would tremble. People pass by him without stopping. Footsteps lightly brush past the bench where he sits. Some are talking on the phone. Others laugh with friends. They see an old man in a gray windbreaker, sitting silently before the sea, his eyes as if shrouded by a thin mist. But no one knows that this man once held the fate of a ship in the heart of a storm. No one knows he once ordered the bow to cut through waves in darkness, once read the wind by intuition when every instrument failed, and once preserved the lives of 18 people by his own will. A storm does more than shatter a hull. It lays bare the deepest courage within a person. Charles endured that in 1971, a strange storm, sudden and raging. While the radio remained silent, he was offshore with a crew of young sailors, and instead of waiting for rescue, he was the one who brought them all home. No one knows that. No one sees the scar beneath his sleeve, the sleepless nights etched into his slow gait. An hour passes. He still sits there, unmoving, not rising, as if leaving this bench would bury something vital forever. He cradles the small wooden box in his hands. His fingers occasionally tighten around the metal inside, unseen by others. Yet, like a silent vow, do not let the past slip away. His gaze remains fixed on the sea. Waves break in steady rhythm. The wind drifts through his hair. No words of complaint, no trace of anger, only a profound, still emptiness. A silence understood only by those who have borne great burdens in darkness. No one needs to know, but when no one remembers, it leaves a nameless chill within the heart. He feels no anger toward the club's gatekeeper, nor toward passers-by who do not spare him a glance. The morning's refusal was like a door closing slowly and soundlessly, leaving one frozen in place, not from shame, but from the realization that all one has lived and sacrificed can be forgotten so easily. The wind still blows, the sea remains blue, everything seems as before, yet within him, something is on the verge of breaking. A part of him, the part that always believed true worth would never be forgotten, is trembling. He recalls the USS Harper, the moment communications were cut, the instant he chose to turn the bow sideways, exposing the hull to waves to keep the radio transmitter alive for those final minutes. He remembers the worried looks of the young sailors, how they sat in silence together as water rose along the sides. None dared to speak, only trusted him. He remembers the moment the first helicopter appeared in the sky, when he knew they had caught his faint signal, when he realized that what he did, maintaining contact, remaining calm, keeping them from surrendering, had meaning. And then he remembers receiving the medal, a small, quiet ceremony, few cameras present, Only a handful of commanders, a group of comrades, and the folded flag handed into his own hands. He did not keep the dress cap, did not keep photographs, only the medal, like an irreplaceable fragment of memory. Now that medal lies in his palm like a milestone, like proof that he once lived a life of meaning. Yet out there, no one knows. No one calls his name. No one asks why he sits here. Only those passing by, those continuing their lives. And amidst it all, Charles feels drained, gently and quietly, like a tide receding without anyone noticing. The world is busy. People change. Old achievements find no place in modern clubs. He is not angry at being refused. He is pained by the understanding that, in their eyes, he has never existed. And though the sea still breathes evenly, though the Florida sky remains clear, within him a storm quietly churns. No wind sounds, no thunder, only the unspoken loneliness of someone who devoted a lifetime, then one day realized no one remembers anymore. He still sits there, alone, amid the familiar breeze. But this time, he no longer feels the sea's comfort. Only one thing keeps him from rising, something unfinished. And he waits, not knowing why. For deep within, something still lingers somewhere offshore, like a belated response, like a faint sound soon to return. The first jet engine roar cut through the tranquil sky like a slash. Its timbre not only touched the air but carved through the silence that had enveloped the harbor all morning. That sound stirred ripples on the water's surface. It caused hands holding coffee cups to freeze. It made children riding bikes halt and look up. No one could ask in time. No one knew what was happening. Yet everyone felt that, in that moment, something was shifting. Against the clear sky, a squadron appeared. 5 jet fighters flew in a V formation, moving with absolute precision. No wobble, no disorder. As if their flight were calibrated to the commander's heartbeat. Their metal wings sliced through the wind with pride, leaving behind a deep sonic trail that needed no explanation to convey. This was no ordinary flight. Charles looked up. He did not blink. The wind blew against his face, lifting strands of silver hair. Yet he remained still. His body seemed carved in stone on the old bench. And then he recognized. He gazed at the formation, his eyes suddenly tense, not from astonishment, but because a memory surged up like a blade driven inward from the depths of his heart. The lead jet tilted slightly, a movement too subtle for those unaware, but a life or death signal for someone who had once commanded. This was not an acrobatic maneuver for show. It was a greeting coded, layered, profound. A greeting not sent to the crowd, but meant for one person, Charles Reed. And he understood. Before he could react, a second sound rose. The warning siren from below the harbor. A wholly different sound. Sharper, clearer, closer. It was the churning of helicopter blades. Then its image appeared at the edge of the landing zone. A Navy helicopter, painted silver, bearing rescue unit insignia. It descended slowly, as if every inch were aligned with respect. The door opened decisively, like a soldier clearing a path on the battlefield. No announcement, no procession, only one person stepped out, clad in a dark blue flight suit that hugged his form. He removed his helmet visor, and with his eyes alone, he found the one he had come to meet. Charles remained seated. The pilot walked a few steps forward. The crowd parted gently to either side. No one spoke, as if no one dared to interrupt that moment. a moment more sacred than any formal ceremony ever held at this harbor. The pilot halted, standing erect as a ritual. No microphone needed, no repetition required. His voice sounded just loud enough, yet firm, slicing through the wind like a thin blade. "Commander Reed, we have come to honor you." No applause, no reaction. The silence became the only music left at the harbor. Charles looked up, his eyes trembling slightly. He said nothing, nor did he rise. He only stared at that pilot, the man who had used his old rank, long thought buried under layers of time. In that gaze lay all the years forgotten, the times he sent signals with no reply, the meals in the quiet house without anyone calling, the memories no one inquired about. And now this young man, a continuation of his life's story, was approaching not as a fan, but as a soldier answering an order from the past. The sea breeze still blew, but this time it was not cold. Charles gripped the wooden box holding his medal, not from fear of losing it, but as if to keep his emotions contained within his chest. He did not need to ask who the pilot was. The way he stood, the way he looked at him, the way he pronounced "Commander," all said, "I know who you are. I have waited for this day for a long time." After a while, Charles merely nodded. Not the nod of someone newly honored, but the nod of someone who has heard the final signal from the universe. You are still remembered. You still have worth. The pilot did not advance further. He simply stood there, and that was enough. In that moment, Charles was no longer sitting alone on the bench outside the fence. He stood amid awakened memories, recognized not by paperwork or applause, but by the one thing he had needed his whole life, someone responding to the signal he once sent. The young pilot stepped slowly toward the bench, as if each footfall carried an unwritten chapter of memory. The sea breeze swept across his shoulders, his flight cap removed and held tightly in his hands, like a silent ritual of respect. Standing before Charles, he did not bow, he did not smile. He stood erect, solemn, as before a living monument. "I am Lieutenant Mason Blake," his voice rang out, steady and decisive, without a microphone. 15 years ago, you taught me at the Jacksonville Naval Academy." Charles said nothing, yet in his eyes something shifted, like a streak of light across a formerly overcast sky. Mason looked straight at him, unblinking. "But I knew of you even before that," he continued. "You were the rescue ship commander in the 1971 storm. You saved my father." Those words fell onto the harbor like a heavy stone striking still water, and then silence. A hush so deep that even the sound of waves seemed to pause. Those who once turned away from Charles, who once viewed him as a lonely old man, now stood frozen like statues. No one moved. No one looked away. Charles remained motionless, yet his hand, resting on the small wooden box holding the medal, now tightened, not to protect an object, but as if holding on to himself, holding back something swelling fiercely in his chest. He looked at Mason without uttering a word, but his eyes conveyed emotions never previously permitted to surface. Heartfelt gratitude, astonishment, and something very close to pride. Mason took another step. Not too close, just enough to maintain respectful distance. "I do not know if you remember my father," he said, voice lower, softer. "He was the navigator, his leg trapped beneath the deck when the ship listed. Rescue teams could not reach in time. You were the one who brought him out of the engine room, and my father always said that day you saved 2 lives." Charles tilted his head slightly. The wind lifted strands of silver hair onto his forehead, but his gaze did not leave Mason. His lips pressed together, as if opening them would unleash an overwhelming tide of emotion. "You did more than save them," Mason said, inclining his head slightly, voice hushed. "You taught us that when no one is watching, we must still do what is right. When no one acknowledges us, we must still believe in our own worth." A gust of wind swept across the water, yet no one stirred. In that moment, the harbor ceased to be a tourist spot, ceased to be a meeting place for racing boats or club members. It became witness to something sacred, memory called by name, history revived, an old sailor restored to what he had never demanded, recognition. "Today," Mason paused, eyes fixed on him, "we will not let you be forgotten." Charles gazed at him, eyes reddened yet unshed. He did not cry. He did not collapse. He did not diminish himself. He sat there, upright, hands on his thighs, as firm as when he once sat on a deck awaiting the first storm. Then he nodded. Not a perfunctory nod, nor a gesture of courtesy, but an acknowledgement that he understood, that he knew this moment was real, that after years living silently on the margins of the modern world, at last his voice had been heard. His expression hardly changed, yet if one looked closely at the corner of his eye, where only time can touch, there was a slight tremor. Mason said nothing further. He simply stood. A few squadron members stepped forward behind him, not in formation, not on command. They needed no introduction. Their presence alone was declaration. They had come not to perform. They came for him, a worn man with a wooden box and eyes that had witnessed too much forgetting. Within Charles, images unfolded like old scenes passing slowly. He saw the faces of long-ago sailors clinging to life in darkness, trembling hands grasping his, and then the image of this young officer before him today, standing straight, resolute, as if a continuation of the generation he once held safe at sea. The wind still blew, but now it was no longer a cold intrusion. It was the breath of something released. Charles tightened his grip on the wooden box. For the first time, not in defense, but as an act of gratitude. No ceremony was performed, no drums or trumpets, no new medal presented. But for Charles, that moment, between the old teacher and the former student, was the highest honor he had ever received in his life. The club manager stepped slowly. Each footfall seemed to bear an unseen weight. His hand gripped the brim of his hat, not because of the wind, but as if seeking a hold to steady himself amid a reality suddenly reversed. His face was blank, not a word spoken, no excuse offered. And when he reached Charles, he merely bowed his head. Silence. Amid a crowd holding its breath, in an atmosphere strange and solemn, as if part of an unspoken ritual, he produced a small object, a card. On its silver surface was engraved, "Honorary Member Charles Reed." The manager's hand trembled slightly as he handed it over, not from fear, but from understanding that he was touching something greater than a membership card, something he had forgotten, yet was now compelled to remember. The presence of a man who once placed others' lives above his own name. Charles said nothing. He did not stare at the card for long. He simply rose, neat and deliberate, like a soldier accustomed to roll calls without names called aloud. He accepted the card with a slight nod, not in a raised voice, not with a shrug, not with flourish, just a simple gesture, enough to convey, "I understand, and I forgive." The breeze still swept across the harbor, yet everything around seemed to pause, as if even time needed a few moments to accept this change. Then, in the quietest moment of that day, a female voice came over the PA inside the Naval Command area, echoing through iron posts and cables. On behalf of the United States Navy, we are proud to announce this year's annual regatta will officially bear the name Reed Regatta, a competition honoring courage and endurance, inspired by Rescue Commander Charles Reed, who saved 18 sailors during the storm of 1971. The announcement was brief, but enough to shatter all whispered fragments. In an instant, the harbor, once a place of leisure gatherings, became a living memorial, where people turned to one another in surprise. Then, like a wave of sound sweeping through the air, applause began. From the group of pilots behind Mason, to children standing by their bicycles, from servers still holding coffee cups, to senior club members who had turned away just an hour earlier. All applauded in unison, not the loud clamor of a festival, but a deep, measured rhythm, a beat of respect. Charles stood at the center, still. He did not raise his hand. He did not wave. He did not nod in thanks. He simply stood there, the card in his hand, as a truth slowly burst within him. For the first time in decades living in the shadows, he no longer needed to shout in silence. He was heard. Every word from Mason, every recognizing gaze, each clap like invisible radio signals finally tuned in to the frequency he sent out in earlier years. Signals once lost to the void were now answered with acknowledgement. Tears streamed down his cheeks. No sobs, no sign of weakness, just droplets rolling over wrinkled skin, falling onto his worn jacket, as quietly as he had lived his life. No one looked at him with pity, for today, those tears were the most sacred sight this harbor had ever witnessed. Not for the title, not for an honorary card, but because finally, what he had always upheld, ideals needing no applause, loyalty needing no stage, silent courage, had been named rightly. In the crowd, a boy tugged his father's hand, softly asking, "Who is he?" The father bent down, replying quietly, "A man who never abandoned anyone." And behind them, the club's sign was temporarily replaced to read, "Home of the Reed Regatta, for those who never give up." Charles remained standing. His hand clutched the card as if holding all the fragments of a memory once swept away by the wind. Within him, an old chapter closed, not with a farewell spoken aloud, but with a peaceful look. And somewhere in the breeze, like an old radio voice, came the echo, "We have received your signal, and we are here." The next morning, the first light swept across the harbor like a thin silk ribbon. It sparkled on the calm water and the steadfast masts. No noise remained. No crowd remained. Only the sacred stillness of a place that had just witnessed something immense. On the main mast, a small bronze plaque had been newly affixed. Its dark bronze gleamed in the sun like a slow-burning flame, and on that metal background, the hand-engraved inscription stood clear, simple yet cutting straight to the heart. This is where Charles Reed was once refused, and also where he was honored. No drums or banners, yet anyone passing by paused, read each word slowly, and nodded in silence, for they knew this was meant for no one else but a person who had fought in silence all his life without ever seeking credit. Charles no longer sat on the wooden bench by the deck, no longer with those keen yet quiet eyes looking out as if reading memories from each wave, no longer with gaunt hands clutching the weathered wooden box of time-worn color. Yet he remained there, in the memories of those who witnessed, in Lieutenant Mason's measured voice from yesterday, in the way children sat quietly listening as parents spoke of someone who had lived a lifetime for others. In the image no one could erase from the mind, a man with a faded navy cap, standing upright against the wind, as if the wind could not sway him, as if time itself had tried to forget him, yet even time had to pause and bow. The story of Charles Reade was not merely a hero's tale. It was a reminder of the power of steadfastness, unseen, not needing to shout, yet capable of moving what seems immovable. It was testimony to a belief that must not be forgotten, the belief that no matter how faint the signal, if we keep sending, someone will at some point receive it. A sail, a wooden box, a nod, may not change the whole world, but sometimes it's enough to change a community, a generation, a perspective. And if you believe in those values, unconditional loyalty, enduring patience, silent heroes, subscribe to Veteran Best Stories and share this story, for perhaps, somewhere, someone still sits by a harbor with an old radio, hoping their own signal will be heard.